Wissam, the link you sent was just the registration link.
Oh, it doesn't have the.
All right.
Okay.
Chris, let me see what I can do here. Oh, hold on. Yeah. Okay. Everybody who's listening, Mike Hopkins had a medical emergency. We're trying to get his second in command on, and we're having some technical difficulties. So please bear with us a moment. There's going to be talking over this. I apologize.
Yeah, and Dave, there is a Zoom link in what I sent, just to let you know.
Chris, you said you just needed the ID. 822 4632 9354. Let's see if I can get the link here for you. Don't see you on the speaker side, but we'll try and find you. Otherwise, we'll have to unmute you or something like that. I'm going to send you another link here. I'm going to try anyway. So hello, everybody. We still have lots of people coming on. There were over 950 people that registered for this. So I'm watching the counter and it's continuing to tick up, which is a great thing. So apologies, will be a couple minutes further. Also, one of our speakers is having some technical difficulties. Hopefully we will get that resolved shortly as well. So thank you for your patience. We will get started in one more minute. We're still trying to get our other speaker connected. Again, apologies for that. Oh, there we go. All right, fantastic. So let's get started. Here we go. All right, thank you everyone for your patience. Apologies. Welcome to the hydrogen economy. If, when, and how. We're hundreds of attendees today. So a couple of sort of like housekeeping rules. One, you're all on mute. So sorry about that, but that's the way it is. Two, we are recording this, but since you can't speak, that's fine too. Number three, if you've got questions, please use the chat. We do have someone monitoring the chat and they will feed questions in sort of in real time as we go through this. As I said, it is being recorded, so if we will post it later on as well. My name's Dave March, and we hold these webinars to give you sort of like in-depth information behind the scenes, what's going on in the energy space. These are non-commercial. We try and do is make them, as I'll say, as fact-filled as possible. Just one quick note, the Mike Hopkins, who's the CEO of Bacon Energy, unfortunately had a medical family emergency last night, was unable to attend, and Chris, is it Tilston? How do I pronounce it, Chris? Tilleton, the Chief Projects Officer, will be joining us in his stead. So thanks, Chris, for jumping in at the last moment. What we try and do is to give you a broad base understanding of the space we're talking about. In this case, the hydrogen economy, and we pick industry experts from different aspects of the industry to give you their views, their opinions, and things like that. So I'm going to do the introductions and we're going to get started right away. Again, questions into the chat, appreciate that. Okay, somehow the chat function is no audio. Okay, so starting up on the, if everybody's pictures are the same as mine, on the upper left, we have Wassam Bishay. Wassam is the global head of the energy management solutions business for Cummins. His portfolio includes hydrogen electrolyzers, hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen combustion engines, batteries, and battery vehicles. So somebody who has an incredibly broad-based knowledge of what's going on. Moving across or down from that is Alex Marshall. Alex Marshall is the head of international for Clark Energy, a global leader in combined heat and power systems, a Kohler company. And I'll get a little bit more background there as well. Alex is also a council member of the World Biogas Council and also is on the board of the United Kingdom's decarbonization of gases. I think is something like that, Alex. I'm sure you'll correct me on that. So he brings, excuse me, sort of an international perspective. Chris is Chief Product Officer, Projects Officer, if I got that right from Mike, and is it Bacon? I don't know the best way to pronounce that, Chris. Bakken, okay, Bakken Energy. So let me sort of set the stage on where these people are coming from. So Chris, Bakken Energy is targeted to be the largest supplier of low carbon hydrogen, at least in the United States. As much as, if my memory serves me correct, Chris, 380,000 tons of low carbon hydrogen per year. They recently acquired the Great Plains Synfuel plant and are re-engineering that to make hydrogen with auto reforming. And the beauty of it is, right off the bat, it's sort of a zero carbon footprint because they're using natural gas that is otherwise being flared. So Chris brings in the high volume side, the infrastructure side, and the fossil side. As I mentioned with Wissam's got a broad portfolio. So he is our expert in products and applications. And Alex, sitting there with two fluorescent green generators behind you, is focused on, I'm going to say, customers, applications, and actual project execution. So if I got it right, Alex, those two generators, that's only two that I can see, there may be more, are actually running hydrogen at a customer site in a CHP configuration. So you can give us that real world sort of insight as well. So I'd like to start off, and this is going to sound like a sort of a stupid question, but I'm going to start with you, Alex. What is hydrogen? Now, I don't mean that like it's, you know, it's the first element in the periodic table, but from an energy perspective, when we say hydrogen, what are we really talking about here?
So typically it's a gaseous fuel and a chemical store of energy, much like coal or methane or other fuels. Hydrogen doesn't have to take millions of years to create like fossil fuels, although it can originate from fossil fuels depending upon the process. And depending upon how it's created, it need not apply to additional carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And finally, it's a gas that burns very quickly compared to other gases, so that can give challenges.
So to me, a fuel is just an energy storage mechanism, right? I mean, whether it's diesel, natural gas, or hydrogen, we're storing the energy in chemical bonds and then extracting it later. So is there almost, I'll say, a one-to-one, some sort of comparison between hydrogen as storage and a battery, which is also storage?
They can be directly compared as both are stores of energy. One is a chemical store and the other is an electric charge separation. But they have different niches and for different applications, I would suggest.
But there is a huge battle going on in the marketplace right now. I mean, Elon Musk is saying hydrogen is the dumbest thing he's ever heard of, et cetera, et cetera. And then I see billions upon billions of dollars and government incentives going into hydrogen. So we've got this conflict. One of the reasons we wanted to hold this webinar is to sort of open that up and really understand what's behind it. So Chris, I also get confused on hydrogen. It seems to come in colors. What are the colors and what do those things mean?
I think, Chris, we can't hear you.
Can everybody hear him?
No.
I don't think so. Dave, if you'd like, I can jump in while Chris fixes his.
Please
yeah.
Please
so as someone who spent the last 20 years in the power generation space, right? I really didn't have much exposure to hydrogen. I never knew that hydrogen had a color as a gas, right? So it was really confusing when people start talking about green.
Yes, we can get you now, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. My phone call with you died. So one of the most important things about hydrogen, and hopefully this isn't too elementary for our audience, but the most important thing about hydrogen is that when you combust it or use it in a fuel cell, it produces 0 carbon. That's why we're all chasing after hydrogen. And the other thing about hydrogen that's interesting is that it's very hard to find hydrogen isolated in nature. It's always bound to something else. The nature of hydrogen, the fact that it has 1 electron, it wants to bond with other molecules. So you'll find it bound with carbons, hydrocarbons, or you'll find it bound with oxygen in the form of water. And these are the 2 main ways that we're trying to isolate hydrogen so that we can use it for fuel cells or for combustion. So when your question going back to the different colors, all the colors represent in a very, I would say, inaccurate way is how was the hydrogen produced? What was the method of producing the hydrogen? So with the color blue, for example, you're going to be using a natural gas as your feedstock for the hydrogen, with the addition that you're going to be capturing some amount of carbon from that process. The reason that we tend to not like colors too much is they're very imprecise into how much carbon are you actually capturing from that process. So that's blue. Gray would be a hydrogen from a hydrocarbon source, coal or natural gas, that would produce hydrogen but not capture the carbon. That is the way that the majority of the hydrogen in the world is produced right now. carbon is not captured from that process. That unlocking of the hydrogen from the carbon, which is what happens during that process, that carbon is not captured in that gray hydrogen production. Then you get into things like pink hydrogen, which is hydrogen made from water, but the source of the electricity is nuclear. And then you get into green hydrogen, which many people know, using a renewable source of power to unlock that bond of water, of oxygen and hydrogen to produce hydrogen. So those are the colors. But again, the colors are imprecise. For example, in green hydrogen production, you could use a fossil-based source to produce that green hydrogen, and then it wouldn't really meet the objective of being the cleanest way to produce that. But what they've done with what the US government's trying to do is to define what does clean hydrogen mean by specifying a number of CO2 produced alongside with that hydrogen and making sure that that ratio is very low. But
So
maybe that's a long answer.
Yeah, so in your case, you're doing auto reforming, which is natural gas to hydrogen. You're doing carbon capture. That's fairly, I'm going to say fairly efficient, because the gaseous output or the waste product of hydrogen production or auto reforming is like 98% carbon dioxide, isn't it?
We can meet a very high, well above 95% carbon capture rate. And when you think about carbon capture for our process, you've got to think about power and steam production, as well as the actual breaking of that hydrogen off of the carbon from the natural gas process. So we're using a process called ATR, autothermal reforming, which gives you the ability to have a very high capture rate on the CO2 in the process.
Wissam, and again, some background. Wissam and Cummings are building electrolyzers. Right off the top of my head, there's a 25 megawatt electrolyzer in construction in Florida. I think we just announced a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Canada, and I'm sure the list goes on and on. So both to you and to Chris, what do the economics look like for the different types of hydrogen production? Chris, I think you guys have sort of set a target. And isn't there a government target also, sort of like what was the Sunshot program in solar? So Wissam, what are we looking at economic-wise? And please translate it. Don't give it to me if you can in dollars per kilogram, because I can't make that doesn't make any sense to me. You can do it in dollars per BTU or kilowatt or something if we can.
Yeah, I mean, it really varies dependent on the source, right? So we have, as Chris explained, you have many different colors of hydrogen. So green hydrogen, dollars per kilograms. I know we're going to use dollars per kilograms because that's what the industry uses, right? But you can convert it with round trip efficiencies to kilowatts or BTUs, and it depends on the source. So if it's gray hydrogen, which is what typically you see a lot in the market, which is coming mainly from natural gas, right? I believe what I see is around $2, right, per kilogram. So, and then you have to do that conversion to BTU or kilowatts. If it's green hydrogen, it's going to be more expensive. Green hydrogen basically means that you're pulling it from wind power or solar. And interestingly, I was going to say earlier jokingly that I hear now yellow hydrogen,
Yeah.
right, which is solar, and there's like white hydrogen. So that color list just keeps expanding and more. But expectations are, if you're just going to do, I believe, gray hydrogen, which is the most industry used hydrogen source now, I believe that we're looking at around $2 per kilograms is what I see in the market. And when you look at green hydrogen, we're looking at $6, $5 to $6. Now, this is without the incentives, right? When you factor in the IRA, and there's now a production tax credit available where they can provide up to $3 per kilograms in credits and production. That will really help accelerate the hydrogen economy. But again, it really depends on how you're generating the hydrogen, right? So the targets will depend on what color of hydrogen and the local incentives that are in place for that hydrogen. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, just one thing, Wissam. I think you nailed it. Yeah, so the DOE had what they called an Earth shot, and one of their Earth shots was the hydrogen shot, and they would like to see the cost of hydrogen come down to $1 for 1 kilogram over the next decade. So, as Wissam was saying, if you're looking at a gray hydrogen production process, which is, you know, in that 1 to 2 range, you can imagine how hard it would be to layer on the additional carbon capture or other production methods that would produce a very clean product at a lower cost. So that's the objective. The hydrogen shot is really $1 per kilogram, or let's say 33.6 kilowatt hours if you want to equate it to something in a different metric, but $1 per kilogram over the next decade. And what that would mean from a natural gas perspective is really driving down the cost of that feedstock as much as possible, taking advantage of these government incentives. And I think Wissam can probably speak better about electrolyzers, but it would mean having a very low cost of power for those electrolyzers, very low cost of renewable power.
Yeah, I want to circle back on the cost, but first, Alex, I'm again looking at these fluorescent green hydrogen generators behind you, real world application. Where are they getting their hydrogen and what are they spending for it? You're on mute, Alex. Sorry.
This is hydrogen before hydrogen was sexy. This is a furnace gas facility in South Africa, and it's an off gas from the furnace consisting roughly 20% hydrogen and balanced carbon monoxide. So yes, you can burn carbon monoxide as well as, and this is a common thing we're finding is we're all talking pure hydrogen here, but at least in the early stages, a lot of the sources are going to be blends with other gases, whether that's a blend with a pipeline gas, including methane in there, carbon monoxide in this facility in Western Cape in South Africa, or other locations.
So Wissam, you mentioned maybe $6 or so a kilogram. What I've seen in the literature has been more than that, but we'll take your $6 there. Chris, I believe your target is about $1.50, I think, something like that. Last time I talked to Mike.
That's right.
Okay, a controversial question here is, can electrolyzers ever compete, or should we just use natural gas, autoforming, and carbon capture and call it a day? I'm putting you on the spot there, Wissam, with that question, but that's a big gap to overcome from $6 to $1.50.
Well, I think like everything else in the distributed generation business, right, there will need to be a lot of government incentives to help accelerate and build this business. 20 years ago, PV wasn't attractive, right? The economics didn't make sense. Same thing with wind. As you scale it, the cost will drop down. And that's what we see, right? We think that maybe now the economics don't make sense, but in 10 to 15 years, the electrolyzer costs will drop substantially. And there is a clear glide path that goes with, the cost drops substantially as you scale it. But it's not just the electrolyzer. That's the one thing I want to kind of, so watch out. From my experiences, also, you have to keep in mind the balance of plant and the other support systems for the electrolyzer. And the issue I see is that you don't see that glide path really dropping substantially for the balance of plant, a lot of the support systems, right? So that is one of the concerns and challenges that we have in the industry. Yes, we can work on reducing the cost of the electrolyzer so that in 10 to 15 years, it will be attractive to generate hydrogen from these electrolyzers. I can tell you the economics now look good for utility scale with the right incentives in place. I think it's more challenging for distributed electrolyzers. That's what I think. It's at this stage very early. It's very pilots, it's just driven by pilots, academia. It's not really economically sustainable at this stage. So most of our activity is large scale, like that Nextera project, 25 megawatts plus, and we have projects in Europe that are much bigger than that. But yeah, I think figuring out how you're gonna reduce the total system cost, how are you gonna transport it and store it in the pipelines to get it delivered to the fuel cells or where the hydrogen engines are, these infrastructure questions are going to be the biggest challenge facing us, more than the cost of that electrolyzer.
We had a question, and I'll try to answer it and correct me because I'll probably make a mistake. It says, what are the different origination methods and different feedstocks? In general, there's really only two, I think, and that's going to be natural gas, and we're going to do that through steam methane reforming to get hydrogen, or it's going to be water to electrolysis. Anything else in that is so, I think, marginal. So it's really basically, do we use a fossil fuel that's rich in hydrogen, or do the water, which again is rich in hydrogen? So I
think that's essentially true, David. I would just add that there is an interesting other method for producing what they call turquoise hydrogen, which I didn't cover in the colors. I'm sure some have heard of turquoise, but it's an interesting process. It uses natural gas through a process called plasma pyrolysis. And what it does is it separates that natural gas into hydrogen and a solid carbon black product. So both of those are different products that can be marketed, but it is another color and a slightly different process.
So going back to Alex, you made sort of I'll say the analogy, or I forced it on you, sort of the equivalency of hydrogen in a battery, right? I can go to my wall socket over there and I can plug in my Tesla. I have my Tesla Powerwall and everything else. How do I get hydrogen to me? What is the infrastructure? What's the delivery mechanism? And can we create a hydrogen economy without trillions and trillions of dollars of infrastructure investments in pipelines and things like that? Let me start with you on that, Alex.
I think that depends upon the application and how the hydrogen's being generated. If it's blue hydrogen with carbon capture, you're talking volume levels of production. And we're sitting most countries, or significant amount of countries, on gas infrastructure that can be converted to operate on hydrogen. Whether that is a blend, a lot of people are talking 10 to 30% hydrogen initially. Then a lot of these gas distribution companies would then want to go to 100% hydrogen, whether that's existing pipelines or new pipelines. And then you have to look to, distributed hydrogen generation with electrolyzers if it happens. I take the point that the economics need to be worked out, and that's going to be much more locally stored and locally used. And I'd suggest if that's the case, it would be for peaking applications. It would be to fully decarbonize microgrids.
So the thought is potentially the natural gas pipeline infrastructure can be used. Can we get that to 100% hydrogen, or is it probably going to get stuck as a blend? What do you think, Chris?
Well, yeah, so a couple, there's a lot there, right? So I think your question is it going to take trillions and trillions of dollars? I think maybe all of us can say yes. It's actually going to take a great deal of investment. That's what the whole Hydrogen Hub program is about, is developing some of that connected infrastructure to get product to market. So when I think about putting hydrogen in pipelines, there's some technical challenges, right? Some metallurgy problems. We've all heard of embrittlement, and the fact that hydrogen is such a small molecule. Some of the gauges and the metering equipment may not actually work well with hydrogen. The molecule is so small it might actually leak from some of these connection points. So that's one challenge. Let's assume that that's not a challenge, that we get over that. The blending is really mainly to test the ability and also to lower the BTU at this level. You would never put hydrogen into a natural gas pipeline and then extract it back out as pure hydrogen on the other side. I don't think that would make sense. You go through so much work to isolate that hydrogen, you just wouldn't want to do that. So I think that hydrogen, like natural gas pipelines, will be used to transport hydrogen as demonstration for whether those pipelines can support a pure hydrogen product at some point.
And maybe I'll jump in, Dave, on this
Please.
one, because this is something that we debate a lot, right, internally in Amazon and the trade associations and industry. do you really need 100% hydrogen pipeline, right? I mean, most of the boilers and most of the loads and facilities will not be able to run anyway on, but we're seeing the most common spec for a lot of the big industrial loads and a lot of the facilities that we have our generators in. They'll ask for a 10% blend, maybe 20%, right? But I don't see the business case and the demand yet for higher hydrogen blend percentages. Now, I know that, yes, we are developing grease-up engines that can run on 100% hydrogen. We have fuel cells that can run on 100% hydrogen. But I think that for the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see most of the applications using hydrogen basically be blended hydrogen.
Yeah, so Wissam's talking about obviously the natural evolution of how things will work. And we have to differentiate between fuel cell grade hydrogen and maybe a combustion grade or an agricultural grade. But for fuel cell engines, which we're ultimately targeting, that's what I was thinking, that we're going to need that 99.97 purity hydrogen, where lesser purity of hydrogen can be used for different applications, but fuel cells are very picky. A hydrogen fuel cell will demand a 99.97 or better purity.
For a PEM fuel cell, right? Yeah. For a PEM fuel cell, I just want to clarify, but with solid oxide, you have more flexibility on the fuel. Go ahead.
Chris, you mentioned something that I'm not really clear on. What is a hydrogen hub?
Right. Well, I think that probably the best thing to do is to not create my own definition of that, because I'm sure a lot of people would have definitions. I think the best thing to do is use the DOE's definition. And what the DOE's definition is, they're looking for regional production, processing, distribution, storage, and end use. So you can imagine the full supply and value chain for hydrogen in a region. And what they're hoping to do with the regional clean hydrogen hub program is to establish 6 to 10 of these hubs in different areas. And each hub will have a different purpose. They're looking to have end use diversity as well as feedstock diversity. So they're looking to establish hubs across the country that will test the different colors or be able to produce hydrogen of the different colors, and then have different end uses like we've been talking today: industrial, agriculture, power, transportation. So that's what each hub will have its own unique flavor, but the idea is that ultimately these would connect. You don't want to fill up in Minneapolis in one of these fuel cell trucks and then not be able to get hydrogen when you're in Arizona or something. So the idea is that you spread them across the country so we can actually develop an interconnected hub network.
Wissam, Cummins is doing fuel cells, I guess both PEM and SOFC. It's doing hydrogen combustion, it's doing electrolyzers and everything else. And again, when I stand back and I watch, now say the mainstream media, just what's going on back and forth, it does appear to be, hey, it's either batteries or hydrogen. You guys are in both. I mean, you're making electric vehicles, you do fuel cells. Where's the applicate? Why? I mean, is this an all or nothing thing? Is there going to be a winner and a loser, or is this an all of the above solution?
I think it's going to be an all of the above solution, because it's really complex, right? Every application, every use case will have a different technical solution to it, right? So we are investing in electric buses, right? It makes sense. We have an electrification business unit that's working on that, smaller trucks as well. But when you're talking about heavy duty applications, when you're talking about like semi trucks, rail, ships, that's where hydrogen wins. That's where the economics of hydrogen makes sense. And we see hydrogen as the next diesel, right? That's kind of a lot of how people view it, right? Yeah. So it really depends on what type of application you have. The economics will favor smaller electric vehicles, right, with batteries. But as you go bigger, and heavier duty and industrial, that's where the economics will shift towards hydrogen. There's another also big discussion going on how to store renewable energy, right? You can have large scale, utility scale batteries, whether they're lithium ion or non-lithium ion, but they're different chemistries to store the renewable energy. But also hydrogen can play a big role in storing, for long duration renewable energy and using it for seasonal use or for grid services applications. So like many other companies, we're making different bets on different markets, but I do think that the easy way to think about it, if you need heavy duty and long duration, probably go with hydrogen. If you're looking at, few hours or the electric vehicle or a smaller truck, batteries probably make economical sense.
Let me ask a question. You said sort of heavy duty semi-trucks, et cetera. So a hydrogen combustion engine will be, at least from my calculations, slightly more efficient than a diesel engine, just due to a variety of things, but it's still not as good as a fuel cell. But I'm still going to I'm going to have to carry more hydrogen to use a combustion engine than I would a fuel cell, just because of that efficiency loss. So where does a fuel cell play versus a combustion engine? When you talk about sort of heavy trucks or semi, are those combustion, fuel cell, both? How does it kind of shake out?
Yeah.
Is that a question for me?
Anybody.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, sure, I'll try to take that on, but I just want to say Wissam is right on in that it's important to end this false dichotomy that it's either batteries or hydrogen. There really are application specific. Hydrogen will fit much better in certain areas than others. So when you get into internal combustion versus fuel cell, I think what we have to understand is that there's been a great deal of research and technology developed around the diesel engine itself, the internal combustion engine. And if we're going to get this hydrogen economy moving, likely the best way to do that is to leverage existing technology. And it just so happens that it's a lot easier to transition from a diesel-fired engine to a hydrogen-fired internal combustion engine. What this will allow us to do is to develop the production and the supply and the infrastructure to get the hydrogen to these vehicles earlier. Because if we're waiting to have the perfect fuel cell vehicle, it's going to take longer than if we adapt the internal combustion. So I see the internal combustion engine as something that will help us get started, but it probably won't end up there. I can't imagine it really ending with the internal combustion engine running on hydrogen. It'll be a step in the way.
So one of the questions that came in is, and again, going from this, the heavy load or the semi trucks, et cetera, is hydrogen a possible fuel for larger engines, and specifically like marine container ships, those very, very large engines that we have today? Wissam, does it scale that way as well?
I would say technology-wise, you can develop it, right? But the economics and the business case is not there. I think a fuel cell would make more sense in a lot of these larger applications, but I see the internal combustion hydrogen coming in trucks, right? Where there's a footprint limitation, there's a power density issue, but I think if we move towards hydrogen for the bigger ships and rail and so on, I think PEM fuel cell may be very interesting specifically, because PEM is designed to handle variable loads like diesel. Solid oxide is more designed for base load applications. So I think PEM fuel cells will play a big role in ships and rail moving forward.
So am I justified in saying, if I step back, wait a few years, I don't know what a few years, 5 years, right? And I turn on the television, whatever, I say, okay, where's hydrogen being deployed? Is it going to be long haul trucking? Is that where we're going to see this, Chris?
I believe so. I believe that makes the most sense. The ability to decarbonize that sector and achieving cost parity between diesel and hydrogen in that market I believe is the lowest hanging fruit.
Why is
There's obviously a lot of challenges with the distribution and reconfiguring all the stations to support that, but I think that's our belief. Yes.
Why is a hydrogen, say, semi vehicle, whether it's a fuel cell or a combustion, superior to battery? I mean, I think, again, never sure when Elon Musk is actually going to deliver anything, but I think they talked about next week he's going to deliver his first semi truck or so. What's the economic difference? What's the sort of the differences between the two?
And I think there's a couple that are fairly obvious. One is the weight of the batteries themselves. If you're looking at the margins and you're trying to optimize a vehicle for moving product, you don't want the weight of the truck itself and its own power supply to eat into 12 or 15% of that. Imagine just taking 12 or 15% off your bottom line. That's what you're doing with a truck of a battery, right? The batteries weigh so much. The other part of it is, how long is a truck driver willing to wait to have that battery charged? It could be days. I mean, who knows? And what is the infrastructure going to require to be able to support the charging of these large batteries? What kind of grid improvements? How would that actually work? I mean, I say days somewhat comically, but
hours is a lot of time, right? Hours is a lot of time.
It's going to potentially take a long time, and you've already eaten into your payload. So those are a couple of the challenges with battery operated Class 8 trucks.
So we focused a lot on transportation. We talk about fuel cells, which is electric, et cetera, but that's only two aspects of I'll call it the carbon economy. Alex, what about hydrogen replacing natural gas, whether as a heat fuel for boilers and things like that? We still have to tackle that big challenge. Is it an opportunity for hydrogen to be used in industrial heat processes like furnaces and boilers and things like that?
Well, certainly, so some of the European projects in particular are dedicating some of the hydrogen for that use. We haven't talked so much about power generation directly. So I'd like to take it back a step and look at what's happening in the power generation market. And if you see that, the trend globally is more and more solar, more and more wind, and you're getting to the stage when in a fully deregulated power market that gives you a true spot price of electricity, you're getting this dichotomy of very, very, very high prices at the top of the scale where there's not enough wind and solar, and very, very low or negative prices at the bottom end. So with the ability of a customer to be able to take that value, it becomes it's not just about the electrical efficiency and the conversion efficiency, it's the time efficiency of that power and being able to use it and deploy it at the most appropriate time. And one of the discussions was kind of touched on there on transportation, that's also the same for power, is most of these applications aren't going to be for base load power or something running 24/7. They're going to be ability to support a microgrid or decarbonize a gas peaking station where you're trying to achieve a fully decarbonized grid, and hydrogen becomes that buffer. And the batteries, again, for grid scale applications, they have 1 to 2 hours duration typically. The long duration of hydrogen and peaking stations enables you technically to produce power. Let's not forget, hydrogen is generating power directly, whereas batteries are typically storing power in a chemical medium. So you're not always comparing apples with apples here.
Help me with a comparison then, though, because in order to store the energy as hydrogen, I have to store the hydrogen. Now, one of the complicated factors is hydrogen is the highest energy density per gram, but one of the least energy dense per volume. So in order to store it, you've got to pressurize the bejesus out of it. And I think, Wissam, if my memory serves me correct, it's about 10,000 PSI for a hydrogen storage tank in a vehicle or so. So you have that energy necessary to compress it. So back to you then, Alex.
If you okay, perhaps you're right, but if you're using it in the gas distribution network, the storage volume in a gas distribution network in the pipes is immense compared to a small grid connected battery control system. Okay, on a microgrid, yes, that's going to be more important because you're going to be comparing how much you can store in a tank on the site. But in the gas distribution network, okay, you've not got an unlimited store, but it's pretty large considering the duration you're going to need to dispatch it.
I think this is one of the biggest challenges, right, is the storage of hydrogen, right? Especially if you're not connected to a pipeline and if you're running pure hydrogen like a PEM fuel cell. This is where I think the biggest limitation is, and until we resolve that issue and come up with real solutions, economical solutions for storage and transportation, it will take a long time before we really see hydrogen play a big role in the power generation market, right? So I can tell you that we've talked with multiple companies that are looking at different ways to store hydrogen, whether it's in gaseous form or liquid form. The problem with liquid form is you'll have to, it's going to have to be stored at very, very cold temperatures, which makes it very difficult to store and transport. And then, we're looking at ammonia, we're looking at methanol. So there are many different concepts that are being used. One of the projects we're working on is converting hydrogen to methanol and then reforming the methanol again to electricity in a fuel cell. It solved the problem for storage and transportation, but you have a lot of efficiency losses, right? When you're reforming, you're converting to methanol, then reforming it again, right? So these are the challenges that the industry is facing.
You also have to look at it from a customer perspective. One of the areas we're seeing a lot of interest is mines. And mines have to have a 25-year investment, horizon plus. And when the mining investment companies are requiring a strategy for minimizing carbon emissions for that mineral, the replacement of diesel, because a lot of these are remote areas and they need to run diesel engines for, typically more than backup power, that economics starts to make more and more sense. In Africa, in remote areas of the US, that starts to become interesting.
Well, so we got a question. I'll read it and I'll translate it. Will hybrid economical hydrogen installations paper specifically is you put them on the grid and you use what's available. So when there's solar, you use solar. When there's wind, you use wind. And when in between, you use whatever is being in between. Now, it may be some new color, Chris. You get to name the color on that one. Do you think that's a sort of a feasible or reasonable way forward?
I think so. There are a lot of different papers, and the DOE has a lot of funding actually on long duration energy storage, right? And one of the things that we are engaging in many discussions with different agencies on is what's the right way to do long duration storage, right? You have different chemistries for batteries, but we're also looking at hydrogen. Can you generate the hydrogen, store it underground, and do it for, use it for seasonal use, right? Where you need power for, like, let's say the wind doesn't blow for multiple days, right? So in that case, right, it'll be very expensive to do it with batteries, right? Hydrogen can play a big role in long duration storage. When it comes to short duration, I think batteries will play the bigger role in grid service support, right? So 4 hours, I think probably batteries, 4 to 8, I'd say currently, for the next few years, I still say batteries. Once you go above 10 hours, right, I think hydrogen would be an attractive energy storage means for helping balance the grid as you get more and more intermittent renewables on the grid.
A question came through sort of meeting, and I'll call it Sunshot. I don't know what they named it here, the dollar per kig. Wissam, what do we think the price of renewable energy would need to be in order for, again, given the cost curves, learning curves of electrolyzers and balance of plant and things like that, do we have to see continued improvement in renewable generation cost falling, or are we there and it's more just on the hydrogen production side that we got to bring the cost down on?
My opinion is that renewable energy is at a good place now with wind, especially in solar, right? We're talking a couple cents per kilowatt hour, right? And then you have hydro, right? So I don't think the issue is about the cost of renewable energy. to generate the hydrogen or to do green hydrogen, right? The issue is more about just, you have the footprint, the regulations, it's more logistical, right? And just getting the right approvals in place to build these large utility scale electrolyzers, and making sure that you have also the expertise to support these systems. Like, this is a new space, right? And you don't have a lot of expertise in the market to build and install and commission and service these large electrolyzers. So there will be a lot of new jobs generated as the hydrogen economy accelerates, and there will be a need for people that understand chemistries, how to split water, how to service, electrically and mechanically, the thermal management. It will generate a lot of green jobs, I believe, moving forward. But I don't, again, going back to the question, renewables are in a good place now. It's more the other stuff that we talked about that's limiting the growth of hydrogen.
I'm going to make sort of I'll say a controversial statement, which is the US economy historically has basically been built on the inefficient use of cheap energy. Okay. Alex, I think you nodded on that one. You're a Brit by genealogy, I think, but you've got global perspective. Europe has always been more energy efficient than the United States. We may be catching up, but they've always been more energy focused. What are you seeing globally? Are we seeing more hydrogen activity, incentive, and adoption overseas, Europe? You're in South Africa with those units, or the United States? What's the global perspective?
That's an interesting question. So the various different European Union countries and European, if you're talking about Britain, on that roadmap. So the UK has got a hydrogen strategy. It looks to be both a combination of blue hydrogen with carbon capture and decentralized green hydrogen. Both are kind of equal importance. France, with the large amount of nuclear energy that's on the grid, is looking for ways to use that and possibly convert that to hydrogen. And there's significant kind of interest in France as well. And then even the countries like India, Bangladesh, we're seeing interest there, particularly with supply constraints and lack of domestic production of gases. Australia, again, under pressure to decarbonize and move away from coal. So there you're seeing both the potential for large-scale green hydrogen electrolyzers in remote areas where they have lots of space. You talk about some blue hydrogen, perhaps. And then even Africa has a hydrogen association. So you have Morocco with the Sahara Desert, and loads of solar, thinking, what do we do with this? And then the hydro plants in the DRC, and rather than try and move loads of power across Africa, which is just not likely to be converted to hydrogen and have a hydrogen hub. So it's an international topic and a lot of interest globally.
Rossel, we had a question come in for you as an expert, as Cummins, produces more diesel engine things for heavy trucks than anybody, et cetera, et cetera. The question that came in was, hey, heavy trucks, semi-trucks, batteries, they're not going to charge them. They're just going to replace them, right? They're going to drive up to I'll call it a refueling station, swap the batteries out and put them in, put a new one in rather than go hydrogen. What's your response to that?
I mean, there are models like this. I know in China, there's a company that's doing this. It's definitely something we're exploring, and we're also trying to figure out how do we leverage the channel that we have and the branches that we have to offer such services. So it is an idea that we're exploring, but I do want to come, one point that I saw in the questions that's related to this question as well, which is about, someone was saying that we already have superchargers that you can charge the batteries in minutes, right? Yes, they do exist, but the problem is, do you have the grid infrastructure for these superchargers, right? So that's going to be one of the biggest challenges here. So yes, you can charge batteries quicker, and probably the technology will evolve, but it will take many years for the grid infrastructure to get to the point where you can use these superchargers, right, to charge these trucks.
Yeah, good point. I think many people just think that it's there, and it's not. I mean, this is an infrastructure problem. As Chris was mentioning, like, we've got to be able to distribute energy, and then whether that's hydrogen through pipelines, whether that's electrons through the grid, we're already seeing in California problems where the distribution grid, especially at the residential level, was never designed to handle EV charging. And we're seeing extremely short lifetimes, as well as explosions of, pole transformers and things like that. So there's no, batteries is not a get out of jail free card on the infrastructure side of that.
No, supercharging a Tesla is not supercharging an 80,000-pound vehicle either, right?
Yeah. Are there supply chain constraints? We hear about impending lithium shortage, and with lithium, we've seen incredible price reductions in batteries. Some people are forecasting it's going to reverse and costs are going to go back up. Not that performance won't improve, but just because of availability. Electrolyzers use a lot of I'll say precious metals, I think, as catalysts, fuel cells. Do we have a battling sort of rare earth problem in both markets? You're nodding, Wissam. That's, something.
Yes, obviously. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure if the question was just for me, but I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges with lithium ion, right? And everyone knows it. And this is why a lot of people are looking into other chemistries for storage. But we're going to have a similar challenge also with fuel cells. You're going to need platinum, right? So I think the materials that we'll be using to store energy and to, replace diesels and natural gas engines in the future is going to be it's going to be one of the biggest supply chain challenges that we're going to have as this thing really grows and explodes, right? And there's a real concern about the availability of lithium ion and the cost of lithium ion and all the environmental issues related to lithium ion, right? So that debate is still happening in the battery industry, right? And the challenge is, every year there's a new promising chemistry, right? So it's just been very difficult to really make. I don't think anyone can make one bet on the battery chemistry. It's going to take multiple bets, and eventually, hopefully, we get something that we can use. Right?
We're about out of time, so I have two questions. Sort of the first one is, give me a number, each of you, is how many years from now will it be until I see a relatively pervasive use of hydrogen in the energy space? And I'll start with you, Alex.
For full hydrogen generation, I think you're talking 15 years plus. For blends, I think you're going to start to see early demonstrators in the next couple of years.
Yeah, we've seen the CPUC in California has just authorized 10% blend of hydrogen in some of California. Wissam, what's your number?
I agree with Alex, and I think that's kind of where the industry consensus is. Hopefully the government incentives can help accelerate it, but without real government intervention, I think it's going to be 15 years before we see a real takeoff of the hydrogen economy.
Chris, putting you on the spot, you got 380,000 tons of this, I believe, in the next couple of years. I'm not trying to remember the timeline. What's your thought there?
Yeah, I completely agree with Alex and Wissam on the timeline. I think what you'll see in some isolated cases, you'll see the use of pure hydrogen fired turbines for some dedicated purposes, smaller scale. For example, we're looking at that ourselves for hydrogen production to drive down the carbon intensity. And we're talking with several different turbine manufacturers who are working towards that. But the blend is really going to be the initial thing that we'll see in the next couple of years. And all the turbine manufacturers are trying to transition that from the 30% to the higher volumes of hydrogen firing capability.
All right, last one is from the audience. It's a very long one, but it says, I think it would be nice for each speaker to disclose their interests and company stance or place in the market. For example, Chris, quote, your crew's been getting pretty much everything they want from the North Dakota legislature and are lined up for a lot of federal dollars. Governor touts and things like this. I guess the question is, what is the stance of each organization as it relates to the hydrogen economy? So we'll start with you on that one, Chris.
Sure. Yeah, so we're looking to be a very low-cost producer of hydrogen. At the same time, we're working to develop applications that will use hydrogen and developing partnerships with companies that will be off-takers of our product. So I would say that we're interested in every aspect of that chain. Primarily, though, we're going to be a producer of hydrogen.
Alex.
So we're a supplier of CHP engines, so we use them as a fuel, but we also like to supply what our customers like. So as well as CHP units, we can incorporate electrolyzers, gas blending stations, and other balance of plant. So we're not necessarily just fixed. We've got a general interest to kind of ensure global decarbonisation.
Ending with you, Wissam.
I would say we are also a supplier of engines, fuel cells, and batteries. We'll be also a supplier of batteries, right? So, but we are one of the biggest diesel engine companies in the world, and we have natural gas engines. We don't see the diesel and natural gas engine going away anytime soon. It will continue to play a big role for the next, few decades, but there will be an energy transition, and we are positioning the company for that energy transition in the long term.
I am going to ask one more question, and I do apologize to our audience for taking up so much time, but all of you kind of came back and said, pervasive hydrogen economy, 15 years. What is your prognostication on heavy trucks, semi trucks? When do you think we're going to see that as a commercially viable on the road solution? I'll start with you, Wissam.
I think you can see heavy duty starting earlier, and it will start in transportation and then move down to the power generation market. That's how I view it. But I would say maybe 10 to 15 versus 15 plus for the heavy duty applications.
Chris?
Yeah, I think we're going to start to see some percentage, some 15-20% adoption. I would say within 10 to 15 years. I think the earliest thing we'll start to see is some demonstrations with internal combustion engines running on hydrogen, and then we'll have to figure out how to get the hydrogen to those trucks that are going to be using that. So.
Oh, so I did run
Just
over.
being invaded by children.
There you go. We'll end up with you, Alex. And what's her name?
Sorry, I missed that question, David.
I was going to say, we'll end up with you with respect to, do you see the transportation, at least the heavy truck sector, when do you see it being sort of a commercially viable play?
I'm sorry, David, I missed that one as well. It's been chaos here.
Okay.
Back from that, apologies.
I think when Alex's daughter is old enough to drive.
I'll go with Wissam's answer.
So yeah, we'll let you go, Alex. Everyone, thank you so much. There are a couple of questions we couldn't get to. I will respond back to everybody who asked those we couldn't get to. And so it was an interesting question. Can fuel cells powered by hydrogen work with conventional power infrastructure to deliver power to EV chargers? So you use hydrogen as the store, use a fuel cell, and then charge a battery, I guess, is the way it works. I guess that would work, but give it some thought, gentlemen. Anyway, we're over our time. Thanks so much. Appreciate everybody. Again, apologies for a little bit of hiccups there in the beginning. And thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Good to be with everybody.
Thanks, Wissam.